What's up, YouTube? Give me 1 second. It's tutorial time. Today, we're going to be talking about color grading for the colorblind. I am colorblind myself, and it's basically a deficiency of being able to see different shades of color. So I have a difficult time seeing reds and greens, so I have to adopt a couple extra steps when it comes to doing my color grading. Now, the world does not look like this, black and white for me. It might look more like this, maybe a little bit more desaturated, especially in the reds. So I have to do a couple extra things to make sure that my reds look reds, my blues look blue, and all of those good things. Now, before we go ahead, I should mention, if you are not colorblind, I still invite you to stick along with us because I do use a couple of tools in Premiere that you might not be familiar with. So without further ado, let's jump right in and see how I color grade with a slight handicap. The very first thing you should do when trying to color grade is get it right in camera first. Without doing that, you're gonna have a lot more trouble in post trying to add in color or take out color or do color things when it's already ingrained in the footage. So first things first, you need to check your white balance settings. You could either use auto and the camera will do its best guess as to what it thinks the color should be, or you can use a custom setting. So the custom settings I like to use typically utilize color temperature instead of just straight up color. And the color temperature range I like to stick within is around 4,000, which is colder, and 5,700, which is warmer. So let's say 2,500 Kelvin will look like this, and 9,900 Kelvin will look like this. Obviously that was a lot warmer, so staying within some middle range of that will be very useful when getting your footage usable for color grading. Next is shooting in a flat profile. Shooting with very desaturated colors will allow you more flexibility in post. A lot of cameras support log profiles such as S-Log or C-Log or whatever else. The camera I use unfortunately does not. So what I do is I go into the creative style settings on my camera and set the contrast as low as possible and the saturation as low as possible. And that gives me a general flat profile, flat image to work with, so when I'm color grading, I can really control those colors a lot more. So first things first, before doing any color grading, make sure you do it right in camera. All right, now it is time to jump into Premiere. On the timeline here, I have some clips of a couple of trips I took this year, last year, I guess. Joshua Tree. I have this overexposed shot here, obviously very cold. I shot it intentionally very cold because it was winter and I wanted to give that winter look. In New York City, I used auto white balance because the colors were changing a lot depending on where we were, inside, outside, nighttime, daytime. And I was on vacation, so I really wanted to just not have to think about my camera settings, and I just let the camera do its job. And then I have some other shots here of building a computer. Just kidding, I just added them, but you get the idea. I also shot these kind of cold because technology shots look a little funky when they're a little warm. So we have these shots and they're all of different colors. Let's go through and start color grading them. To do that, we'll click on the little color icon up here and that will change our workspace into color. And whoa, what happened? Where'd everything go? We're in the color workspace now, so we can really play with the Lumetri color, which is where we're gonna work with primarily, and the, drumroll, Lumetri scopes. This is very useful, especially for myself being colorblind. I can see where my colors are. So, what is all of this saying, all these funky looking graphs? Well, we have our waveform, our parade waveform, our histogram, and our vector scopes. And each one is telling us a little bit of a different thing, but they all paint the same picture. So our waveform, we can look here, and the very top is going to be our highlights. Obviously, this is a very blown out shot, so all of our colors are very far towards the top. Obviously, we do have some shadows in here on my jacket, so it's dark in some areas. But let's say we move to another clip further down, like sure, this one, it's pretty dark. It was this ramen place I went to in New York, and not a lot of highlights here, but a lot of shadows. All the colors are pretty dark, and we can still work with this. We just have less light to work with, but there's still color. So that's the thing we're worrying about right now. So let's jump back to that first clip. And we also have our histogram. Our histogram is telling us the same thing: highlights on the top, shadows on the bottom, and in the middle are the midtones. And it's also telling us where those colors are lying. So we can see that there's a lot of blue in this image, even just looking at it. And looking at the vector scopes on the bottom, we can also see that there's a lot of blue in here, not a lot of green. Obviously, there is some green. If we zoom in over here, there's some green on the plants and the foliage, and whatever else, but mostly blue. So the lumetri scopes are very useful to find out where the colors are. Now, the way we change this is we can go into the lumetri color settings. Obviously, we can use the basic correction. We can change the temperature of this if we want to, so maybe change that to a warmer color. All right, there we go. We're getting somewhere. Then we can change our exposure. I kind of want to turn our exposure down a little bit, bring down the highlights, and then bring up the shadows. Now, obviously, this is a very blown out shot, so it's kind of difficult to work with, but we're gonna make it work here. Bring that temperature up, and that gets us started. Now, the main area where we really wanna work with when it comes to color grading here and looking at how it affects the lumetri scopes is the under curves and the color wheels. First, let's start with curves. Curves, upper right-hand corner is gonna be your highlights, all the brightest areas. Then the bottom left of the curves is gonna be your shadows, so all the darker parts of our areas. And then the middle of the line is your midtones. So just for example, let's click on the middle of the line and just drag that down, and that's just bringing down the midtones by a lot. Still gonna affect the highlights a little bit, still affect the shadows a little bit, but it's mainly affecting the midtones. Same thing if we just bump it up. Let's just keep the midtones right there. Let's add a little bit of brightness back into our shadows, bring some lightness back into my face, but not too much, because if we bring it up too much, we lose a lot of that detail. And then bring down the highlights maybe just a little bit. And what we can see when we're doing all of this is that line previously that we had, that very harsh line at the very top of our waveform, is now gone. We're trying to bring back those details into the highlights. So if we were to readjust the highlights, for example, and change that and bring that way down, it doesn't look that bad. It's still not the best shot, but we can see when we bring down the highlights here, the waveform comes down. So don't look at my mouse, look at the waveform. Pull that down. Now we're getting more balanced colors in the middle. That looks kind of funky, like creepy funky, but cool. Anyways, so same thing applies to our shadows. If we bring down the shadows, everything on the bottom of the waveform changes. Same thing, if we bring it up, it brings brightness or light into the shadows, and now we're getting further to the top. So that is affecting the waveform. Now, if we look at the histogram and the vector scopes, we can also get an idea of where the saturation of the colors are. So that's where the color wheels sort of come in. We can kind of add some color into those different tones of light. So our shadows, let's say we don't want them to be as cold. Right now there's a lot of blue in here. We can see that in the vector scope, that it's more biased towards the blue section of the vector scope. So let's just reset the curves so we can see what's happening. And go into the color wheels, and let's just bring some warmth back into those shadows. And what we'll see on the vector scopes, look at the vector scopes, not my mouse. I'm pulling that number or that little dial up towards the green orange area, and we're seeing the vector scopes shift more towards the opposite side, away from the blue. Same thing for the highlights. You can pull that back down to the blue, but now it's gonna, I don't want that because it's already pretty blue. So let's just pull it maybe just a little bit more towards the green orange area, and then the midtones, maybe blue it up just a little bit. I'm trying to just show you how these tools affect the shot rather than trying to get a good color grade right now. So let's jump to another shot. Let's just reset everything here. Reset. Boom. Second shot. Not in Joshua Tree. Now we're in New York. Let's change the temperature. Make it a little cooler just because, I don't know, I like that cool look. Then go into the creative. We can bump up the saturation because we're shooting in a log profile. Let's make it more saturated. And then we'll go into the curves, bring some contrast into it by bringing down those shadows, bringing up those highlights, and keeping those midtones right in the middle. All right, cool. So now we're getting somewhere. That looks better. It's more saturated. It looks more real. And then let's go into those color wheels. Midtones might be more my face, so let's warm that up just a hair, maybe brighten it up, but then let's bring down those highlights just a little bit as far as the brightness. One thing I didn't mention, these little dials here next to the color wheels are brightness sliders. So up, brighter, down, darker. Just bring that down there, and then maybe darken those shadows just a bit, give it more contrast. I killed the audio on this because I don't need it, but talking about ramen. So yeah, that looks okay. Basically, when you're doing color grading, you really want to look at the tools that are going to affect the colors the most. We'll talk about HSL secondary in another video, but your curves is going to affect your contrast in a way, and you can also affect the reds and greens in your shots as well. And then your color wheels are going to really help fine tune those colors. Now, how are you going to apply the lumetri scopes and these tools when you're colorblind? Well, now, think about it this way. As you're color grading, and as I'm color grading, having my little handicap, I'm not looking at the shot nearly as much as, say, a normal person. Instead, I'm looking at the lumetri scopes and seeing where my saturation is. Typically for the vector scopes, I'll try and stay within the center, try and not go too far towards the edges. Same thing with the histogram. I don't want to get too far towards the very top or very bottom. I want to keep everything sort of in the center. And then as far as the highlights and the shadows, I want to stay not super far up here unless you're shooting something like a wedding where it needs to be like super overexposed window with the beautiful bride and all that, but we're not doing that right now. Right now, we're talking about just making sure everything looks normal, especially if you're colorblind and it makes it hard to see where your colors are at. So your tools are using your basic correction, changing just basic things like the temperature, exposure, contrast, shadows, highlights, but contrast typically use the curves effect, and you can change the colors of the curves that you want to affect by clicking on the little dot icons, and then your color wheels where you can really fine tune your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights along with their brightness levels so you can get a really good looking shot. But again, make sure, referring back to step number one, we're shooting everything correctly in camera. All right, so those are the tools that you really want to use when you're color grading. Let's move on to giving it that signature look. To give our footage that really iconic signature look, say like something out of The Martian or Transformers, we're gonna use something called a LUT, a lookup table. And what that is, it's kind of like a preset that goes over your video. So let's jump back into Premiere. Let's get rid of all the color grading that we did on these shots. So go back here and boom, nothing there. So to do that, we're gonna add something called an adjustment layer. And if you don't know what an adjustment layer is, it's basically like adding, it's like glasses. It goes over what you see and affects everything behind it or under it. So this adjustment layer, we can go into the creative section and bump up the saturation by 140 or by 40, it's normally at 100. And now it's going to affect all the clips below it. So that's the first step with adding just a general look over your video. Now to enhance this look, we're gonna go back to that LUT we were talking about. So under either basic correction, you can add a LUT. I don't recommend using this method though, because it will add the LUT at 100% intensity. So instead, we'll go to creative and go to look. And you'll see that there's already some presets in here like monochrome Kodak or Fuji or iron, or yeah, a lot of cool things. Turn that off. Let's go into a couple LUTs that I have. Go to browse and we'll just pick one of my favorites, Okay Fine, from another YouTuber named Zach Kravitz. Pop that on, and that looks gross. It's dark, it's ugly. Ugh. So what we do to change that is under here we have our little intensity slider, and we can change that to turn that off at 0%. Now we don't see the LUT, but it's there, and it's adding that sort of iconic orange and teal look that you see in a lot of movies and films and YouTube and all that. Let's change that to about 40%. That looks pretty solid. I didn't change the clip under it, but now we're getting somewhere as far as the colors. So we're adding the LUT over all of the clips, and if we scroll over to say like this other shot of this person jumping over a bunch of people in Central Park, got a lot of saturated, nice colors here. And then if we just turn that adjustment layer off, now we're back to a flat profile. So let's turn that back on. Power of LUTs are very useful. Let's open up another one just to give you an idea. Let's try this Cold Crush. Not sure what that does because I don't use it that much, but it came with a package. Yeah, it's really making everything a lot colder. Not a huge fan, but it's there. Let's go back to Okay Fine. Oh goodness. Sometimes it bugs out and adds multiple LUTs over, so let's just re-add the adjustment layer and bump the saturation back up and go back to browse. Okay Fine. All right, so those are the power of LUTs. It does a lot of the work for you, and then you can go under to all your footage and change each shot individually. Let's make sure intensity is back to 40. Look at that delicious shot of that vegan bun at a ramen restaurant in New York City. And from here, we have our LUT on the adjustment layer on top. We can really change these colors. So let's just bump up those shadows a little bit because it's a little dark, and then bring down those highlights a little bit. And then let's add a little bit of drama by bringing those shadows down. Now food shots, you typically don't want it to look super cold because then it doesn't look appetizing. So let's maybe bring the warmth up a little bit. And this restaurant was also pretty warm. Then maybe cool down the highlights just a bit. So yeah, that looks pretty good. So the usefulness of LUTs is that you can really add a lot of dimension and color to the entirety of your film or your video, and then go into each individual clip and look at the lumetri scopes and see where your colors are, see where your exposure is, see where your brightness is. And this is where I normally work. Add the LUT, add the basic color effects, and look at my lumetri scopes to make sure I'm not oversaturating anything, I'm not overexposing anything, and vice versa. I'm not undersaturating anything or underexposing anything. So yeah, you can use from here the tools of the curves, the color wheels, and the lumetri scopes to really get some good looking videos. But I have invested in some other tools that have been really helpful to me as being colorblind that speed up my workflow. So let's jump into that right now. Ooh, one thing, almost forgot. Free LUTs. Where can you get LUTs? Oh, I can't believe I forgot that. So LUTs, A lot of YouTubers make them and they sell them. I've purchased a couple myself because it helps just speed up my workflow and allows a second pair of eyes who has better eyes than me to really add some color dimension to my video. You can go to this link right here and you can find some free ones, or if you just do a Google search on the interwebs, free LUTs, you'll find plenty. All right, so now that the free options are on, let's talk about some software that you can use to help your workflow. Moving on, talking about software that has really helped improve my workflow and speed. Again, you don't need to buy these. I am not sponsored by them, but again, very useful. So let's get rid of this adjustment layer completely, fresh start, re-add it, drag it over everything. Whoop, whoop. All right, so have our shots of different types. Let's work on these computer building clips. So rather than going into Lumetri color, we're gonna go into effects, and I have the red giant magic bullet suite. We're not gonna go into how to use them today. Basically, Colorista is very similar to Lumetri scopes, but you have a little bit more flexibility, so to speak. Not gonna go into the details, but you can use guided color correction, and then there's a lot of just, basically there's a way in which you can go through the footage and it'll sort of try and do its best guess. So this tool is really useful because it uses a lot of independently developed software that can really help get your colors done in a more professional way. Don't need to buy it. You can obviously do this in Premiere yourself using free options, but very useful, especially for me, speeding up my workflow and being colorblind. Second is another one, looks. And it's kind of like LUTs, where we can just go in, find a look that we like, say, Blockbuster Cool. Let's say, sure, Classic Invasion. I don't know why this looks cool because it's pretty green here, but sure, let's just apply that. And now we have that look over everything, but if we turn off that adjustment layer, it's not there and it's a little intense, so let's just bring that down to 40% and looks a little bit more dramatic, all right? So basically purchasing options is valuable if you can fit it into your budget. Again, not sponsored. It's literally just to help speed up your workflow. And as for me, having a slight handicap, it's useful because I can get a second pair of eyes from a technical level to really just help get those colors dialed in and make my videos look the best possible. So the last thing we're going to talk about is a little difficult, but it's probably the best options when it comes to color grading, especially if you need to show your video to other people, all right? So let's go into that right now. So maybe the biggest thing that will help with your color grading, especially if you do have some difficulty seeing color, is, it's a hard one, but ask a friend. Be like, hey bro, do you mind looking at my video? Just give me some feedback on it, or say straight up, hey bro, I have some difficulty seeing colors. Do you mind just checking this out, making sure the colors look good, making sure all my shots are looking not like they're on Mars or on Pluto or anything like that. That would just be super helpful, and I do that all the time, unless it's for like a project where there's sensitive information. Sending a video to a friend or a colleague just to be like, hey, do you mind making sure that this looks good? Super useful because you can get a second pair of eyes, and I don't know, I'm a firm believer of when you work with other people, you get more collaborators, so you can get an even better product at the end of the day. Let's outro this thing by saying thank you so much for watching this video. This one was a long one, but it's something I work with a lot and something I do have to struggle with, and I thought some people might struggle with it too, and it might be useful to get some tips and tricks on how to color grade if you might be color grading, or if you're not and you stuck around. I hope you learned something here. If you did, or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, looking for my lens cap, there it is. My name is John Jags. I really appreciate you checking out this video. It does mean a lot to me. I will see you in that next one, and yeah, bye.